Kristine Hendren are also part of our planning team. Because today's open mic event is going to be moderated by Kristine Glauber and myself, we wanted to give you a bit of information about who we are, and I'll start and Kristine will follow. I'm the Administrative Director of the UNC CTSA's Team Science Resource, and our UNC CTSA is known as NC Tracks. We promote collaborations among individual investigators and existing teams and develop large-scale facilitated discussion-based events to bring together groups of investigators to create teams to develop proposals, write specific aims, set groundwork for research in certain areas. Most recently, we worked with the new Children's Research Institute. We worked in the areas of precision medicine and mHealth, and we participated in the consortium to develop a research agenda to address the opioid problem in the state of North Carolina. And in the near future, we're looking forward to team science training as part of our workforce development program. Kristine?
Thanks, Karen. So, hey everybody, my name is Kristine Glauber, and I'm calling in today from Duke University, where among many, one of the many hats that I wear in the Office of Research Initiatives, I'm the program director for the Team Science Core in the Clinical and Translational Science Institute, which is funded by Duke's CTSA. So our program is very much in its infancy, and this is because we've sort of finally put formal dollars to programming around team science, despite much effort in this area, especially those efforts of Amanda McMillan, who is on this call right now. But given that this is all pretty new, I'm in the process of identifying unmet needs, resources, and developing programming. So my brain is really in the mode of needs assessment, and that's, I think, bleeding over into sort of my thinking behind this event today. And so as a new co-chair for this Intereach group webinar series, I'm really interested in who's on the other line in these Intereach calls. And so I'm wondering if we can use today's webinar to help foster deeper connections among the community by sharing success stories and establishing some shared goals, and also sharing resources, what's worked for you, what hasn't. And so I am going to, in order to get the conversation going, I'm going to share my screen right here. Let's see. Can you guys see the PowerPoint?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good, thanks. And so this is all of the information about the webinar. And I'm just gonna leave these up, and can you guys see that? The introduction, it's hard to say, know what you guys can actually see, but.
Kristine, you need to play down at the bottom. And then you need to show the second slide, I think.
Okay, I don't know why that's not working, but I'm just gonna do this.
Yeah, just click on the second slide, that'll work.
Yeah. So, so I'm just gonna leave these questions up and open it up for conversation. We're really looking to, like I said, share resources, best practices, success stories. Maybe if you are currently experiencing some kind of challenge in your current role, if you have success stories as a facilitator, what resources in particular, I'm interested in what resources from the Team Science Toolkit do you find most helpful? And then also jumping over to the right side of the screen, how can Intereach help? What topics do you want to see next year in the spring 2019 lineup, and who might you like to hear from? So I'm going to open it up. If anyone has any specifics or questions that they want to get into, we can start.
So Kristine, this is Amanda McMillan, and thanks for the shout out earlier, although you give me much more credit than I'm due.
Not true.
As your predecessor in the driver's seat of Team Science at Duke. By way of introduction, I'm the Senior Staff Director in charge of Workforce Development for the Duke CTSI, and was tasked with sort of managing or overseeing our efforts towards Team Science in the last iteration of our grant funding. So that we just got renewed. We're starting up a new cycle, and in the time frame of our last funding cycle, I believe, is when Team Science became an official core in a more recently released RFA for the CTSA award. So it was on our radar in our last iteration, and therefore somebody needed to start doing something with it. And that person was me. I will have to admit that I did not do much with it, which is why I give Kristine all the props in the world for her generosity in acknowledging me, but also for everything that she's accomplished just in the short time that she herself has been in this role. So thank you, Kristine, for being such an excellent champion for this. I will say that my experience with Team Science has not been terribly deep. I myself am not a scientist by training, and therefore have not conducted Team Science personally, although I've been involved in what some projects that might be characterized along those lines. But now, I do know in my interactions with the principal investigators and other researchers around Duke with whom I've had conversations about quote unquote Team Science, I've gotten a range of responses and reactions from, oh, I do Team Science, I'm a PI and people work with me, to what is Team Science? I don't even understand what that means. Isn't all science about teamwork? And a lot of reluctance, quite honestly, in the last few years. I mean, it may be changing. I suspect that the sands are shifting beneath our feet even as I speak, but I do feel like my experience has always been either a misunderstanding of what really constitutes Team Science and a reluctance to change one's way of doing business, because after all, it's worked so well for me up till now. So says the investigator. So definitely a lot of work to be done from what I see in terms of incentivizing researchers to really embrace and celebrate, you know, the wonderful things that can come from those kinds of interdisciplinary collaborations. And so I believe I mentioned that I have participated in some sort of interdisciplinary work in my role in the last few years, and I'll give a shout out to Duke's Bass Connections program, which is, I'm not sure where it sits, I guess within the college itself. It's a privately funded program whereby teams are assembled from across the university, in some cases across campuses. So for instance, I was on a team that was diving into the case of Medicaid expansion in North Carolina and making the case for why it would be good or a bad thing for the state. This was a couple of years ago when it was still a question mark to be examined. And the team pulled together people from the School of Law, from the School of Business, from the medical school, from the undergraduate population, from the graduate student population. We had students from UNC. It was a really wonderful way to kind of bring people together around a topic of mutual interest and also foster conversation and see what different perspectives people could bring to the table and how they really synergize to create a solution. And so I came to view that as a really nice pilot sort of example of this is Team Science at its best. This is what it can look like. These are the wonderful results that can come as a result of that kind of work. So what I feel like what I need in my role as workforce development director is more examples that I can point to of Team Science at its best, people who have succeeded in Team Science, people who have seen a lot of benefit from Team Science, so that when I need to argue for why Team Science training, for instance, should be included in our workforce development plan, I can go to skeptical faculty members and say, here are XYZ examples of why it really can benefit you, and it will benefit your junior faculty and your trainees to acquire this skill set. I know that the CTSA working group. I think it was the working group. Kristine, what was the project where you were asking about collecting stories of team science success at Duke? I know Becky Moen, our program administrator, sort of spearheaded a CTSA-wide effort to collect stories of team science success at the various CTSA institutions across the country. And I spoke with her last week, sort of out of curiosity, to say, well, how many people actually responded? Because I know that I was sort of scratching my head, Kristine, when you called me up and were like, what are some examples? And I said, I don't know any off the top of my head.
I was on the committee. I was on the committee.
Oh, you were? Okay, great. So, yeah, so she told me that they had something like 80-something responses. Is that right?
We had 170.
Wow.
And we had
107, which is incredible in my mind.
170, and 45 CTSAs responded.
Yeah.
And they gave out 11 awards, collaboration and engagement, innovation, and, you know, because it was supposed to be very lighthearted, they gave out an award for the first submitted, and they gave an award for the last submitted. So they presented them yesterday at the PI meeting in Washington.
That's right. That's right. And I think that there's an effort afoot to maybe create some sort of directory or some public posting of the various examples. Is that true, Karen?
This is true. We're trying to, since we didn't do this up front, we're trying to get permission from all of the people who submitted entries to go ahead and allow us to put something, but it will be behind the CTSA website. There'll be a federated login so that you'll be able to access these stories. They may make the winning stories more public, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but
and
yes,
I think that's I think that would be a really worthwhile project, because again, this speaks to people need examples of how it's done and how it's done well, and I think that's a great step in that direction for making the case internally as well as externally for the necessity of team science. And I'll stop talking in a second, but I did want to point out a resource that I think is really useful and that I learned about at a Science of Team Science meeting a few years ago. I believe it's Michael O'Rourke and his Toolbox project, which the website of which I just looked at today to confirm I had the name correct. It's basically a very tidy tool for creating dialogue among team science collaborators so that they're all clear on what each person's sort of understanding or basic research assumptions are and how they can reach agreement about how they work together from a common foundation, which I think is I think having those dialogues are so essential to the success of a team science endeavor. And in fact, I was reminded of this morning. I was in a meeting with the dean of our School of Nursing, talking a little bit about team science at Duke and sort of the fits and starts with which we've had to approach it so far. And she made the remark that, you know, you really have all these different people from different disciplines, all with different research assumptions, and nobody knows how to talk to each other. They talk at cross purposes. And so that reminded me of this Toolbox project and really the groundwork that needs to be laid down before you can really embark on a successful collaboration. So I'll just throw that in the Toolbox pile and stop talking.
Thank you so much for contributing all of that, Amanda. That was really, really great. And I totally agree, having some concrete examples of team science success. And yeah, what a great way to utilize the CTSA is to collate all of those success stories. Karen, I'm sorry if you said this, but I think you said it was going to be behind a login. Do you have any idea when that might be available?
We do not. But I would say it would be useful for it to be the next 6 months, because we're thinking about doing it again next year. And when I say behind the login, it means going to NCATS, the NCATS site, and you'll be able to go, if you're affiliated with a CTSA, you should be able to use your institution login. You can set up an account and you can log in that way. They don't want to make it impossible for people to get in, but I think they don't want random people hitting it. So just establish yourself with a login for the site and you should be able to have access. We'll certainly try to announce it to everybody when it's available.
Great. Awesome. Okay. Let's see. Has anyone else used the Toolbox Dialog initiative, and what experience do you guys have with it, or does anyone else have any other resources that they'd like to share around creating this common foundation at the start of a project?
I can speak to some experience using the Toolbox project. We piloted it at an event that is specific, I think, as everything needs to be when you are when you're kind of doing an example use of something, but it was specific to some communities of research that I won't take too long of a tangent, but they're in the area of nanomaterial environment, health, and safety research. So there are these 7 communities of research intended to link 7 different domain spaces that are important expertise disciplines for that group of questions around environmental health and safety of nanomaterials. And so we invited Michael and Stephanie and Steve Crowley to utilize the Toolbox to try and find some fault lines between the different communities as they were going through a scrimmage event that we'd designed. So it was really interesting. What we did learn is that it's hard to patch on. I think they would say this too. We didn't have that much time to be able to let them do a full 3-hour session. We just tried to kind of append their survey tool to the session that we were already doing. And I think, as often happens when you pilot a big grand idea, we maybe bit off more than we could chew to really get the full value of what they were doing. But they were amazing to work with, so generous with their time, really creative in how they could kind of apply the Toolbox. So from that perspective, I would highly recommend it. I would just say from the domain side, I would recommend making sure that you give them as much time as they really need to be able to set things up so that you can get some usable outputs that would also kind of benefit them in the end. So anyway, a ringing endorsement and a lesson learned.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Kristine. That's awesome.
Hey, Kristine, this is Amanda. I probably find this information on the Toolbox website. Hey, it's nice to hear your voice. But was there a cost associated with running the workshop that you recall?
No, there wasn't, and it was partly because we were all in the mode of seeing how we could pilot their tool in new and different domain spaces. So I don't know that that's typically the case, but because it was sort of a partial use and an exploration, it made sense in their research mission to try it out. So it's always worth approaching them, and they're a great team.
Great.
Okay, great, thank you. We're talking about integrating some team science training into our KL2 Career Development Award program this cycle of the CTSA funding, so that might be something to explore.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
I just wanted to speak to, this is Lauren G. Hi, everyone. I'm brand new to Duke. I've only been here for about 5 months, I think. And I work in the Office of Campus Research Development. And it's a fairly new office here. And so my viewpoint kind of comes from like the funding agency focus proposals. And I wanted to speak to a couple of things. Oh, a little louder. Is it better if I lean closer? Is this better?
I can hear you okay.
Okay. Let's see. Let me know, guys, if you can't hear me as well. I wanted to speak to a couple things that Amanda had said. The first one is kind of like that PI pushback on, you know, sort of the importance, barely here. Sorry, I'm using my laptop and I don't know like why it won't be louder. Hold on, everyone. Nope, it's a PC. Somebody else talk, and I'll try to figure out my my microphone system.
So Lauren was just saying that she is fairly new to Duke. She's been around for about 5 months now, and she works in the Office of Campus Research Development here at Duke. And so she is coming at Team Science from more of the funding and proposal side of things. And okay, I'm coming through well. That's great. Lauren, if you just want to speak to me, and then I'll translate it over.
That's a bummer. Derek, can you hear me better now?
I can, yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yay!
Sorry, guys, technical difficulty. Okay. Yes, everything Kristine said. I just wanted to speak to a couple points that Amanda had made, and the first one was of sort of PI willingness versus unwillingness to kind of buy in to this this team science like rhetoric and team science approach. And something that's really interesting, I came here from Colorado State in Fort Collins, and they were trying to do some like quantifying qualitative studies, have both results about effectiveness of team science on proposals, winning proposals. And one of the things that came through is kind of like a generational difference of PIs. And so what their research suggested was that PIs who are a little more established, kind of been in the game for a long time, and therefore maybe have a lot more funding, are much more used to this idea that Amanda kind of said of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why should I invest in team science when I have the money coming in? But actually the newer generations of researchers, not only, early career, but assistant, associate professors, obviously it depends on the field, depends on what they're working on, but they seemed a lot more willing to kind of invest and buy into the team science idea. And so one of the interventions that the team ran was getting some of these earlier in their career people onto the teams as like powerhouses, basically, for promoters for the team science experience. So that's just an interesting thing I thought I'd bring up. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, what was it? I got excited about that research at Colorado State and then forgot. Let me think about it, but that's one thing you might note moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. Identifying the champions of team science are at an institution, I think, is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Amanda,
it's interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just giving you the mic.
Well, I was thinking, this is Amanda again. I just can't shut up, apparently. I was thinking it's interesting to think about how promotion and tenure figures into these conversations, right? So the senior investigator who has the money rolling in, they also probably have their professorship, and they don't have any concerns about APT any more than, say, much less so than, say, a junior faculty or mid-career faculty member might. And so I think, Kristine, I don't know if Kristine Glauber, if you have, didn't you say you had some success at looking at the APT metrics for Duke at least? Because I feel like that's always sort of the elephant in the room when it comes to team science within a clinical setting. How am I going to get promoted if I'm part of a team?
Yeah.
And I don't know how much progress people have made on that fairly significant issue.
So I'll just say that we're just starting to evaluate what the different schools are, how the different schools are recognizing collaborative inputs. And so the School of Medicine is relatively open to it, from my understanding, and we're just trying to start to foray into the other schools and institutes at Duke to understand how they how they recognize team science collaborations and stuff like that. So, but we have connected with a couple of APT committee members to try and just get the idea, get the seed planted that this is something that we'd like to move forward on. So,
Kristine, if you like, there's actually an active committee right now that's wrapping up and figuring out its reports to the provost on tenure and promotion overhaul. And so last year we passed them the awesome paper that Holly Falk-Krasinski and Julie Klein wrote about specifically updating tenure and promotion policies within universities to with kind of pragmatic ideas for how to recognize and promote interdisciplinary work. And so Duke is highlighted in several cases within that that paper, which is fantastic. Yeah. But also that committee is reviewing that paper as part of their process of coming up with new recommendations.
Great.
So, yeah, that could be a great group for you all to connect with while you're doing this kind of survey for the CTSA overview of campus.
Yeah. Any information you can pass on about which committee that is, and would be happy to connect with them.
Great. Just really quick, I'm seeing that Chris Lund has a question for the group. And since it's nighttime, I would love to let her jump in as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I'm unmuting my audio. Thanks, Kristine. So listening to you, it just strikes me that I'm not sure if it's really the case for everyone, but a lot of the discussion around the team science we're talking about tonight seems to be in the exact and experimental sciences, or the hard sciences. Mm-hmm. And so in my case, I'm in the language sciences that is interfacing with computer science, also with cognitive science and cognitive psychology. But I'm wondering, like, one of the things that is really a difference that we see here in France in these kinds of discussions, when you have a person that is at the frontier of the science, though, so they are a researcher, but then they're also organizing the science and helping to make connections with other stakeholders that are outside of the academic community. The difference between the exact sciences and the human and social sciences is that people are going to ask the experimental sciences for patents. They'll be on the intellectual property area in terms of that's going to be a difficulty, is the patents. And for us in human and social sciences, we don't, the kinds of value that we add to our research isn't counted in terms of patents. It's more counted in terms of, like, we're writing a white paper that is illustrating all the different ways, like, how can we add socially added value to our research in terms of maybe, well, adding to society in some way, adding maybe training for, say, we'll be studying human interaction between patients and hospital staff for cognitive and language pathologies. And because we know how to understand human interaction and what happens with aphasia, or what happens with Alzheimer, that we're able to then to train caregivers based on what we understand what happens with between those people. So it's not a patent, it's not like. And so what we're doing is we're writing this white paper that is, like I said, going to delimit all these different ways that we feel that we're making contributions that are not in the domain of research, but that are at the frontier of society and the academic community. And I'm wondering if that's something that other people have done in this community during these webinars, or is it something that even Team Science has looked at? I know, Julie Klein represents the humanities a lot, but that's, again, something a little bit different. So I guess my question is, would there be interest in discussing what we've learned, our experiences regarding this white paper that we're trying to write up right now? And would somebody be able to contribute also from their own experiences so that it could be like an international initiative as well?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this completely like foreign to all of you? What I'm saying.
Kristine, I don't want to jump in if other people have stuff, but I want to say that feels so similar to a lot of the things that we've been trying to do here in Saint. I guess that's the hat I'll talk about. So it's a thing where we have to figure out creative ways to express our impact. You know, it's kind of like a broader impacts for people who are familiar with NSF and different creative ways to just set up bean counting. But I wonder if something like a broader impact center, like we have one of here on our campus, but I know that NSF has some throughout, and NIH for those funds have similar metrics that they need to hit. And so a lot of times, maybe what we could do in this group is to draw on the evaluation community and try to make some congruence or just connections between people who are evaluators of large centers and need to report back to the funding agencies and the people who are looking at tenure and promotion, because there's a little bit more creativity and sort of fit for purpose thinking in the evaluator community. And I know that that's a rich community that is part of Science of Team Science too. So maybe that's one response.
Okay, thank you very much. So there would be interest in pursuing this in some way.
Yes, and definitely, you know, I know Kristine and Karen were, when planning this, were really hoping to get exactly this type of insight, like what would be directly, practically useful to you to talk about, and we can design our upcoming lineup to meet that. So maybe evaluators are just what came to my mind, but maybe there are some others too that we could add.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely broader impact and the metrics that can move across disciplinary boundaries. I think that we're going to have some specific things because we're in the human and social sciences that aren't going to be the same for the exact sciences. But having said that, I participated recently in an initiative where we had engineering and technology, we had biosciences, and then we also had our language sciences and education people. And the title was Repairing the Human. So it wasn't transhumanism where we're surpassing the human and adding stuff to the human. It was more like repairing even bone structure or replacing bones and tissues, but it had to do with language and cognitive pathologies. And one of the things that crossed boundaries, and this is something that's really classic and we've all experienced it, it's that the vocabulary that we use when we diagnose things that are going wrong, there's this trajectory from being sensitized to some kind of difficulty, and then there's diagnosing it, and then there's remediation, and then there's maybe curing, and so there are all these different vocabulary words on this trajectory that are maybe, say there's 5 different stages, and there are, I don't know, 7 or 8 different words that are used in each stage. I have them written down, but I'm not able to tell them spontaneously right now. But what we found out, and this is an obvious thing I think for all of us, is that researchers use different terms than the practitioners use, than the teachers use, than the hospital staff will use, than the parents will use. And so what we wanted to do then in that group, which is completely transversal, both in terms of disciplines and in terms of sectors of the society, to just really just, you know, in some kind of a completely non-ambitious way, in a sense, is just to even draw up a what do you call it when you, a lexicon, just a lexicon, you know, and able to say, well, what do you mean by diagnosis? What do you mean by education or sensitization? Then I'm speaking, I'm like translating in real time in French, and so sensitization is probably not the word in English that we would use, but so that's something that is transversal, which is an obvious thing at the same time, and we've all seen it, you know, the use of vocabulary. And then that brings to mind, we had Frédéric Darbellay come and speak the other day, and he's a guy that presented that the nomadic concept. I don't know if any of you have heard about that, but it's super interesting in the sense, I mean, we've heard of boundary objects and boundary concepts. Well, his is the nomadic concept that kind of like moves across, and I think that's what I'm talking about, are these concepts that change meanings when they move across boundaries, whether they be disciplinary boundaries or stakeholder boundaries. And so that's super interesting, and just like seeing more clearly into those kinds of things could maybe be a goal as well.
Wow. That all sounds really, really good, and also very new to me. So I would love to learn more about it. And yeah, this nomadic concept thing sounds really, really cool. Anything that you could share on that would be great.
You just look up, I mean, I could send you, but I don't know which one of his books it is. It's Frédéric Darbellay. He's in Switzerland. He's written a bunch of books on interdisciplinarity.
Okay.
But I'm wondering, are a lot of them in French? I know that he's been in the team, in the Science of Team Science community. He's been intervening. I mean, he's more in the TDNet, which is the Swiss-German version of transdisciplinarity. It's Transdisciplinarity Network. And so maybe, I mean, he's got some articles in English for sure, and he is Anglophone. But I know that when he came to talk, he did speak in French, and all the books he put up on his slides were in French. But so I admit I have not read his books. I've read a couple articles, so I don't really know if any of the books are in English. But I know that there's something written in English about this nomadic concept.
Okay.
You should be able to find that if you just Google Frédéric Darbellay. It's Darbellay, and then nomadic concept. Oh yeah, Kristine just wrote it in the chat.
Oh great! I actually spelled it right with
my God,
only one L. So
you maybe studied some French.
Hi, this is Betsy. I'll just jump in real quick because I know we're running out of time, and I'd love to hear from the people that we haven't heard from yet. Just to take us back to the introduction, so I'm the Assistant Director of Population Sciences here at the Carbone Cancer Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And my background is research and practitioner of Team Science. I was a cancer prevention fellow at the National Cancer Institute for a couple of years before coming to Wisconsin. And I'm mostly doing practitioner stuff now rather than the research. And so just a couple things that I wanted to bring up for this community is just making sure that as we're moving forward and deciding what we do, that we're not duplicating what's happening in either the research development world or the team science world. But I do think that there is a space sort of in between those two areas that I personally find lacking. In my role, I do a lot of research development, helping investigators find and apply for grants, but also helping them build in the team science components of a proposal and then helping them get up and running. And I'm going to be transitioning to a new role now where I'm going to be doing both research development and team science for the Cancer Center, for our CTSA, and for the School of Medicine and Public Health. So trying to think of ways that we're doing research development and team science across those all those three entities and really thinking about how do we develop infrastructure that can support investigators as opposed to just like sort of these one-off interventions. But what I find really frustrating about the team science world, and we've touched upon it a little bit here, is first that we have all these interventions, but there's very little implementation. Like how does a practitioner like me take the research that's been done and actually implement it in practice? I can't take that 10-page paper that goes into the theories and all that and actually come away with 3 different points of what I need to do with my groups. Mm-hmm. And in terms of, we talked a lot about the team science training, but I haven't seen a lot of, what is the lowest dose required? And how can I convince my investigators that if you invest these 20 hours in team science training, that it's actually going to have such a strong impact on your science that it's actually worth it? We don't have like a counterfactual, right? Like if I do this training, I'm going to do 20% better on my science. I'm going to be 20% more productive. So I think that this could be a great sort of practitioner group. How do I take what's been done and really implement it into my projects that I'm leading? So I'll stop there.
That's really great.
That was really great. Well said, Betsy.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I've been in a number of meetings. I'm just going to chime in just a little bit here. I've been in meetings for the CTSA and other meetings, and we're kind of getting at the same thoughts and ideas about what's needed for team science. So I'm very happy to hear what everybody's chiming in with right now. If you haven't had a chance to say something and you really want to chime in, now is a good time. I don't know exactly who has spoken and who has not.
There was a request. I'm not sure if he's still on.
I mean, Derek has, he dropped off, but he said he would come back, but I'm not sure he's going to make it by 2.
And then I also see that M. Fetchner.
Yes, I can you hear me okay?
Yes. Okay,
I'm very new. I really only heard about you this past Monday from a colleague of mine at Tufts. So
welcome.
I'm participating while listening in and learning quite a bit. And I just wanted to respond to some of the discussion around that I believe Chris was presenting earlier around the social sciences and such. And a disclaimer, since I'm new to this, I hope my comment will not be too far off the mark, but I'm going to say it anyway and maybe just get some feedback from you all. On the social sciences front, I think as you likely all know, and it's also my background is in social science. I have a doctorate in anthropology, in medical anthropology, did work in medical anthropology, and one of the things that I find in trying to work with faculty who are doing interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, or as NSF likes to phrase it now, convergent research, is that the social sciences tend to be a tag team, that they end up at the end, or they're repackaged as broader impacts or as evaluation or as metrics, when social sciences bring in their own set of methods and their own set of theories and ways to phrase questions and study questions, and need to be brought in at the very early stage of any kind of team formation. So no, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but I am interested to learn more about how team science generally handles this kind of complexity with the social sciences, and making sure that the social sciences, and I would add the humanities as well, get their fair approach or their fair integration and are not, as I said, repackaged in these other areas. And so I would be interested in learning more, but also figuring out as I learn more if I can contribute maybe to this conversation, Chris, that you brought up. I don't know if you would want somebody like me involved, but certainly I would be interested in learning and contributing. So maybe I'll just leave it there. But I have other questions, and I may reach out to some of you individually so that I can have conversations with you. I'd be interested to know how I get a hold of email addresses. Thank you.
Thank you so much for offering that and for for speaking up, especially as such a new member of the community. So we really appreciate that. And hopefully if you can maybe just connect with people either privately in the chat, or if everybody wants to, yeah, it looks like Chris, there are so many Kristines on this call. There's so, it looks like Kristine has shared her email address, so that's great. And Christine Hendren sharing some other stuff as well. So cool. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to add to the conversation before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I was
Just
gonna
for M. Feshner, if you would go ahead and share your email, we can help you get in touch with everybody else. So if you could just put it in the chat box. You know, we actually, I think we have everybody else's contact information.
Great.
I was going to say something if we have a moment.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I was thinking more about your questions on the right-hand side of your slide, and some things that people were talking about made me think of a few things. One is this idea that, like the last person mentioned, convergence, right? And this is something that's come out in the latest. I work for an engineering research center, and I'm in a Generation 3 engineering research center. So there's a Generation 4 call that just came out, and they talk about convergence a lot in there. So your question is about how Intereach could help. Maybe one thing to do is to kind of monitor the trends and solicitations for what is being called for in there in terms of either convergence. And the other thing I can think of is that we have an explicit, I guess, what would it be called? They're telling us that we should be changing the existence of the center should be changing the tenure policies at our partner institutions. So, for example, we talked about earlier with rewarding Team Science. So, in younger faculty getting tenure, maybe having shared some efforts as opposed to like producing everything on their own. It would be interesting to see and monitor how those things were being quantified by like ERCs that are specifically called to try to do that, or some other centers that are based in the NIH, because then that you could kind of see the trends of how those things were being monitored, like in annual reports and other things, and then that would give you some metrics to kind of latch onto in terms of sharing. Like other people talked about actually having metrics to talk about in terms of improvement. So I guess you got to figure out what metrics to measure or what metrics to watch first. And then the second thing in that column, what you might want to do for a speaker, I was thinking about bringing in a skeptic. So everybody who's on this call is, if you can get someone to volunteer to do it, but everyone who's on this call is usually like a cheerleader for Team Science. And people talk about all the time how they talk to faculty members who are skeptical of the whole idea of Team Science and this position of executive scientist or various other positions. So it'd be interesting to hear from someone who just wanted to sort of an inversion exercise where the person would just talk about why they're skeptical of this movement. I'm not sure if the others would want to hear about that, but I think it would also give us an insight into what senior faculty members are thinking when they're pushing back on these kinds of things. So those are a couple of ideas.
It's a great idea, Matt. Thank you so much for sharing that.
No problem.
And great idea about monitoring trends and how these funding centers are actually tracking this stuff. I think that's all really, really good to start thinking about.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have anything that they want to dive in on, share in the last couple of minutes? Karen, do we want to move on to the insights slide?
I think so. I think that's a good idea, just to see, get some reaction here in the last couple of minutes, but we also want to make sure we get to the fourth slide.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, here's some information about the science of team science. I think most people here are familiar with the annual meeting that is about this field, which we're trying to create a new field that is looking at the position that we talked about. Members of the community in the last couple of years have been thinking about developing an association, and it's actually in the process of being developed. It's called Insights, and I'm so sorry I forgot what the IN is for. And what could that mean for Intereach in terms of interacting with or connecting with the association? And I have to say that I don't know anything about how associations operate. So I don't know how we might benefit from or connect or help this new association that certainly has the same motivation that the CITES has, or CITES has. And I kind of asked for Kristine Hendren to help give a little bit of context, since she has a little bit more familiar with this than I am. Oh,
Kristine Hendren had to leave the call.
Oh, okay. So you guys, I guess we're left on our own with thinking about this. If anybody has anything to say about this, jump out there and think. If no one does, I can totally understand it. We thought this might be something that maybe we can let this serve as an announcement that there is an association that's being developed that will allow people to be members and perhaps have more consistent and continual input in what happens in this field. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to leave it at that because we are quite close to the end. Yeah. And we'll let everyone know what's coming up next.
Yeah. So, so just a reminder an announcement about our next webinar, which is going to be on November 12th, and actually is going to feature Lauren G., who is on this call, and she's going to be talking about crafting narratives for proposals, team proposals. So avoiding Frankenstein's monster, as Lauren has very creatively come up with. So that will be on Monday, November 12th at 12 p.m. EST. You can also go to intereach.org/webinars to find all of the old webinars that we have put on in the past, and there are some really good ones up there. And in preparing for this one, I was able to go through and look at some of them, and they're there's some really good stuff on there. So I hope you guys will have a chance to go take a look at what we've done in the past and join us again on Monday, November 12th.
And thank you all for being here today. Yes. This has been awesome.